Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining Tenant Talk Live today. Let me make sure that the captions are turned on and that everybody has access to the chat. I think everybody should be able to post in the chat now, but if you want to drop in the chat where you are joining us from, please feel free to do so. And we'll get started in about 3 minutes or so. Cool. So we have Sherry joining us from Connecticut, Marsh joining us from Oregon. We have Sherry joining us from Connecticut. We have Bomani from New Jersey, Cynthia from Houston, Sloan from Appleseed in South Carolina. We have Heather from Chicago. Awesome. So we have Linda from Roseville, Patricia from Atlanta, Julie from Wisconsin, Jose from California. We have Deborah joining us from Oregon. Thanks for joining, everybody. I'll give it another minute or so. I think I'll go ahead and get us started. I think there's still a few people coming in, but I'm really excited for today's Tenant Talk Live, so we'll just go ahead and get started now. And again, thank you all for joining us. My name is Sid Betancourt, and I am a housing advocacy organizer with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Just give me just a quick second. I'm so sorry. I thought I was ready, but I need to make sure that the captions are good. Sorry about that, everybody. We'll be troubleshooting it in the background, but I did save the transcript so I can send that out to anybody afterwards if you're not able to see it, but I think they are on now. But thank you everybody for your patience. So again, my name is Sid Betancourt, and I'm a housing advocacy organizer with the coalition. And for all of those here, just making sure that you're in the right place. We're doing Tenant Talk Live right now with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And again, we're here to provide opportunities for residents to connect not just with NLIHC, but with one another to talk about federal housing policy and how they can influence those policies and lead in their communities. And I'm very excited for today's Tenant Talk Live, where we will be actually having a fireside chat, which is why I have the fireplace behind me, with some folks from NLIHC's tenant leader, Cohort, who recently went to the White House to discuss tenant protections and housing affordability at the federal level. And so I'll have a few folks joining us, but before I introduce them, I do want to just go over our basic logistics. So this session will be recorded as it always is, and it'll go on YouTube later this week. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. You can also use the chat feature to share any thoughts that you might have throughout the webinar. And all of the information, including the recording, the chat, the transcript, any links that are shared will be shared out in a recap email that'll go out this Friday called The Connection. So be on the lookout for that. And so again, today we'll actually be joined by a guest moderator, Zella Knight, who's an activist with the Resident United Network in California. We'll also be joined by Miss Lorraine Brown, who's a tenant leader from New York, and is also a board member with NLIHC. We also have Dr. Bambi Hayes Brown, who is a tenant leader from Georgia and the president and chief executive officer of Georgia Advancing Communities Together. And we also have Laura Ramos, who's a tenant leader from New Jersey and president of Everyone for Accessible Community Housing Roles Incorporated. And so now I want to welcome Zella and all of our panelists to come on screen so we can begin our conversation today. And Zella, if you want to start off by doing your introduction first, and then we'll have everybody kind of introduce themselves briefly before going into the first question.
Thank you, Sid, and good evening to some of you, good afternoon for some of you, and good morning in other areas for some. I'm Zella Knight. I am the president of Resident United Network here in Los Angeles. I am one who has lived experience and expertise in regards to being homeless and unhoused, and I am an activist in regards to the realm of racial equity and disability equity. And so I will pass it to my partners in crime, starting with Miss Brown.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited being here. I'm just humbled and privileged to be here at the table, to be invited by the coalition to chat with you this evening. I'm an activist as well, and I have lived experiences being homeless. I serve on my community board, as well as a board member with my housing authority and with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And I've been fighting for tenant protections forever. And hopefully this time HUD and Congress will put teeth in enforcement and make our lives better. Thank you. Dr. Bambi Brown, Sister Brown.
Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. My name is Dr. Bambi Hayes Brown, and I serve as the President and Chief Executive Officer of Georgia Advancing Communities Together, also known as Georgia ACT, and we're a statewide nonprofit, affordable housing and community development membership organization. And I am also a person with lived experience of homelessness. The latest time was when I was pregnant with my youngest son. And then also I have lived in public housing, and I am currently a renter who also has a disability. So I am a community advocate, and we advocate for affordable and equitable housing on the local, state, and federal level. And I served on numerous boards, including the National Low Income Housing Coalition Board, and served as secretary for the Atlanta Housing Commission. So it is indeed an honor, and pleasure to be here. And I will turn it over to Laura Ramos.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Ramos. I'm president of Everyone for Accessible Community Housing roles. I've been doing advocacy work, particularly for people with disabilities, the frail, elderly, and the financially challenged for a little over 20 years. And I have lived experience with homelessness, directly related to lack of accessible housing available, as well as the substandard housing that is available, which became so bad that, as you can see in this dumpster in the moonlight photo I took on the last day that we were at our last apartment, a lot of the things that were ruined by the toxic mold that was caused from water coming under the building, which no one in the state of New Jersey would fix. Disability equity and across racial groups is very important to me. And I'm really hoping, as Mrs. Brown said, that finally there are some teeth put into enforcing many of the laws that are already on the books.
So let's dive into our chat, shall we? We had the privilege and honor of meeting with various White House staff in regards to having a down-home discussion about tenant protections and what our lived experience consisted with that. So let's start the conversation. What perspective were garnered from the discussion with the White House, starting with Laura?
Well, I'd like to say I got a full picture, but because I could only attend by Zoom, I got a very limited picture of actual experience in being there. I learned a little more talking to people afterwards. But I would say that of all the government officials that I have spoken to, these officials for policy in the White House were the most pro tenant protections and for once trying to get equity into the system to remove systemic discrimination for the elderly, people with disabilities, and racial equity. So I'm not holding my breath, but I'm praying a lot, and I'm really hoping that some teeth can be put into this.
How about you, Dr. Brown?
Yes, I was one of the ones who attended in person, and it was definitely very hopeful for me because all of the attendees and those from the administration really had an interest in renters and tenants' rights, and something that I had not seen before in my 26-year history of doing this work. So that was something that was very pleasing. It was also encouraging for them to say, what can we do as an administration to help solve this issue? Give us some concrete ways or concrete suggestions, such as my colleague Laura. I am not holding my breath because they did make it clear that some of the things may be challenging, especially things that require congressional action, but things that could be done through, for example, an executive order it was very hopeful. So I found that very encouraging.
And Mrs. Brown.
Yes, thank you. I also was able to participate in person. And I sincerely believe that the White House wanted to hear from advocates and community leaders who had lived experience of housing insecurity so that policies could be made to protect the tenants, especially the low-income renters. Now, we talked about past and current in our equities, rebalancing the power between the landlords, corporate landlords, if you will, and implementing racial and disability equity in all policy making. And I stress that the tenant must be at the table from the beginning to the end with regard to policy that impacts their homes. And they need to define what is affordable. And that should be standardized nationally. You know how you go into McDonald's and you ask for a cheeseburger, you're going to get that same cheeseburger, whether you're in California or in Puerto Rico or in Maine. That's how affordable housing should be standardized so that everybody knows what's affordable. Because here in New York, they call a studio at $2,500 a month affordable. So I don't know how they're calculating that when they use the AMI that's set up for the Bronx, which is entirely different from Manhattan. And we also talked about making home ownership a reality. And that the developers, when they have a plan, they must have a public housing resident, a disabled resident, and a Section 8 resident at the table. So from the beginning, the middle, and the end, so that they can give their input on what they need and what's impacting their lives. And they really listened, they took notes, and we talked about broadband. There was somebody from the USDA, and he wanted to know how could he incentivize people from middle America, farmers, to be excited or be interested in broadband. And I had suggested those farmers who have lots of acreage, you work with a optics company and you put the optics on his land, on some of the acreage, give him a fee, and it brings it to the breadbasket of America. I sincerely believe if middle America, rural America, I should say, had broadband, they could have an opportunity to find out what's true, what's misinformation, and hopefully get some training and education and can make informed decisions and vote accordingly. And then we talked about lease protection. And I had suggested that any federally backed mortgages or HUD landlords, or corporate landlords, if they want to do business with HUD, they have to pay for evictions, all evictions. And it must be stated in the leases that if the landlord is going to evict a tenant has to have an hearing, and the landlord will be responsible for all costs. Maybe they will pause and think twice before evicting tenants. And I can go on and on and on, but I'm quite sure Laura has something to share with you as well.
Laura, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate, but I think you shared your perspective already, unless you wanted to share a little bit more.
Oh, no. I haven't shared my perspective.
Yeah. Wait.
Sorry, Bella.
We're gonna fight here. I got to get in on this. I was just in awe in regards to everyone's shared experience and the connection. But keeping it real and relevant was the role that Laura and I played in regards to the fact initially we didn't have that fair playing field as disabled people.
Yes.
And the technology as prescribed by many was not a luxury for Laura and myself. And so that set the foundational discussion in what we experience on the ground. And that's what the important perspective that needed to be heard. Oftenly, many of us in our various roles, we get 5,000 feet and fly, but we oftenly forget those two little elements called feet on the ground, the boots, what really happens. And so I was indeed honored and privileged that we were afforded the opportunity to have two great advisors in regards to domestic policy, Susan Rice and Brian Dees. I mean, having them here directly from those of us on the ground and the acknowledgement, the support, the understanding of what is valuable to us and how important it is for all of us in this collective to lift those on the ground up was tremendous. I oftenly share my expertise and experience with homelessness, my expertise and experience of being criminalized because Black,
Yes.
ostracized because being a female head of household, limited because of my disabilities. And so having that propelled moment to express to Ambassador Rice and Brian Dees in the effort to catapult understanding for better solutions, because ultimately that's what policy should be, better solutions that reach the ground, but they have to be instilled with value. And value comes from those of us with the lived experience and expertise. In my own direct experience, I'm oftenly source of income discriminated. I have a voucher. I can't use it. Why? Landlords don't like the tool. They don't want to be held accountable. And so that has cycled me into a realm of homelessness by me doing the right thing. Then by doing the right thing, I'm criminalized, viewed as a criminal because I don't have the stellar credit report. I don't have the availability to be in a housing realm. I have to live in my car. And so you have those obstacles that are before you. So the mere fact of having the opportunity to express our values as living the experience, breathing the experience, having the experience was indeed an important catalyst. And the coalition connecting together in that effort to get solutions was a powerful, powerful statement. So it was a thankful opportunity.
Thank you for those words. You summarized everything that had transpired and how I feel. And I, as a disabled person, some of my disabilities are hidden because you can't see them. And also as an elderly person, I've experienced many of the inequities that you have stated. And it's up to us, and I'm glad we have someone who's listening that wants to make a difference, that we continue to work with them to let them know what they need to do, and that our voices are there at the table, making policy, being part of that understanding. And I'm so proud that you're part of the coalition and that you are making a difference and louder in terms of disability. And Dr. Bamby and all of the residents need to understand the importance of your words and provide strength and support, and let your local electeds, your federal representatives know of what we're talking about, refer them to this recording, and stay constantly banging on their desks, wanting results, because they want your vote. They have to earn your vote, and they have to perform. And one hand washes the other. Thank you, Zella.
Well, as we, and again, community is that unity. Collectively, understand everybody, we have the power, we are the solution. Nothing should hinder you or bring fear in regards to pursuit of what is right for you. Affordable, safe housing is a human right.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Because as I say here in Georgia, my job is to comfort the disturbed and to disturb the comfortable. And we are in, as you know, here in Georgia, right in the middle of a runoff, very, very important runoff Senate election, with the last day to vote on will be on tomorrow. And it is important, as Mrs. Brown said, you know, we thankfully, the Low Income Housing Coalition has the Our Homes, Our Votes campaigns, and really getting renters out to vote, and really getting renters to understand that they already have the power. They just have to join together with the coalition and let their voices be heard, because they want our vote. You know, we talk about voting, and that's superly important. But just like a record, it has an A side and a B side. So for you young people, you may not know what that is. But on the B side,
I know.
yes. On the B side, we have that accountability piece. And that's what we have to do. We have to hold our elected officials accountable. And we're not going to take this lying down. As my congressperson, the late great John Lewis, you know, it's time to get into some good trouble. And you can't be afraid. You have to be bold in this work. And yes, you're going to face some obstacles, but at some point in time, we have to all come together. Like when we're talking about source of income protections, let's be real. We're talking about those who are housing choice voucher holders, because people, they have this stigma against housing choice voucher holders, or people that live in public housing, that they're going to tear up their neighborhood or bring down property values. And that is absolutely not true. As a real estate broker and a former property manager, it was the people who didn't have vouchers that did all those things, because people who have vouchers they have to comply with the housing choice voucher rules and regulations, as well as those of the apartment complex or the rental unit. So there's greater accountability for those who have a housing choice voucher than those who don't. So we just have to be real about this thing. And we're going to have to stir up some good trouble. And yes, there may be some retaliation, but we need to work throughout the state to pass laws like House Bill 346 that we passed here in Georgia back in 2019 under a conservative governor and a conservative General Assembly, that gives tenants the protection against any landlords if the landlord complains, if the landlord retaliates against them for complaining to code enforcement or the health department in the rural communities for unhealthy and unsafe living conditions. And another thing I talked about was Executive Order 13985. That's already in existence. President Biden signed that. And it states that any federal program, any program that receives federal dollars is required. They are required to ensure that those funds or those programs are done equitably as it relates to race, as it relates to those who are differently able, to those in those rural communities. So some of the things that we did back in 2021, we did a 3V liberation tour, votes, vaccines, and visions. And we went around to 42 cities in Georgia, primarily in those rural communities, and had that executive order read into the minutes of these local, the city and county and school board, their meetings, so they can say, you know, well, we didn't know. Yes, you do, because it's in your minutes now. So now you know. And so that is something that we have to be intentional. And that's something that I did bring up to the administration staff while we were there, is that we have that in place. Now we just need to make sure that we enforce it.
That's right.
I think one of the key things, particularly for people with disabilities, is enforcement. There are so many ways that landlords, the housing authorities, different elements of state and federal government are some of the leading discriminators against people with disabilities in the failure to build accessible housing and the failures to provide equal opportunity for people with disabilities and the elderly to own homes on those programs. If you allow the people who are getting the money from the low-income housing tax credit program or the CBGG programs or any of the other building programs, the home programs, if you allow them to only build townhouses, you're automatically excluding many, many people who cannot do stairs. If you're only building 1 or 2 bedroom units, you're automatically excluding people of different cultural backgrounds who are more likely to want to be able to live with relatives or in a disabled family where you might not be technically related, but you all are pitching in together as a family. And people who have effective communications disabilities, which are disabilities where you don't see or read well, you can't speak well, and you may not hear well, they don't have any enforcement, even at the federal agencies or the state agencies, to actually comply with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which turns 50 years old next year. 50 years and nobody's complying. And yet we're living in an age where these types of hurdles can be so much more easily overcome with the technologies that we have, but there's no enforcement. There needs to be impetus from the top to send out executive. You don't even need an executive order. You send out a memo to all the federal agencies and the state agencies, anybody who's getting federal funds, and say, comply now. If you don't comply, XYZ will happen. And you have 3 weeks to comply. If we get any complaints on this, then you will start getting XYZ other things to happen to you. I have state and federal organizations right now who refuse to provide large print documents. They say they don't have to. I'm saying, yes, you do. These laws say you do. Your agreements with the federal government say you do. Your administrative plan says you will provide large print documents to those who need it. There's no exclusions for government forms. So free the text in the government forms. Take it out of those little teeny tiny microscopic text in those little teeny tiny boxes and make it a different format. You've got it in different languages. Why can't we have large print forms regardless of what language we need?
That's right. Agreed.
But despite having laws on the books, despite having policies availed local, state, and federal. How do we center racial equity into lifting up us out of the struggle? Because again, having the lived experience and expertise of being Black, and I can't stay in my car for shelter because of in the local ordinance. I can't assess anything because of my disability. What solutions can we bring forth in regards to those elements? Again, we're preaching to the choir here and speaking with the White House in regards to what the dilemma is on the ground. Now, what are the solutions that we can uplift in this effort to get everybody whole?
Definitely, I think we need to strengthen affirmatively furthering fair housing. That was gutted under the prior administration. And we need to be intentional about that, not fluff, as we did when I was a property manager, to say, oh, well, we gave a notice to some community organizations that says we have some units available and we don't discriminate, all that boilerplate language. And it's time that I hear a lot of times where people say that, and as a Black woman from the rural South, that we're the least, the lost, and the left out. Well, first of all, we're not lost, we're here. We may have less resources, but we're tired of being left out, and we're not going to take it anymore. So we are going to advocate for these solutions. We're going to advocate for those who have the lived experience because we are the experts. So stop paying these quote unquote experts who pimp our communities out of information. They go into our communities for people with lived experience, to Black people, people who are differently able, get the information, put it in a report, and now they paid the $100,000. We are sick of that, and we are not gonna take that anymore. So we have those solutions, as Mrs. Brown said, from beginning to the end and then ongoing, because we, as a lot are stated, the enforcement is a big issue. We have many of these laws on the books, but the enforcement across the various departments, from USDA to the Department of Energy, and I won't even talk about environmental racism. We'll have to do that talk on another day. But yes, lack of enforcement is a big issue, and we have to fight this at the local, state, and federal level. So we have to go at all three.
Absolutely. And I think I'd like to add to that is the government needs to strengthen their database so that we as residents, we as taxpayers can go to a database of any government agency and see who's complying with the rules and regulations, see who's monitoring these various landlords who are non-compliant, and what is the enforcement? Why hasn't HUD or USDA, land management, etc., enforce the rules that are already on the books? That gives us more power. That strengthens us, our ability to ask questions and to demand answers from our electeds.
So let's take this into a deeper dive situation. Many of our colleagues are on the street, don't have resources, don't have telephones, don't have access, don't have. How can we get them involved in regards to this advocacy work? How do we support them in the advocacy work?
Well, I know here in New York City, in the urban areas, you'll find on every other corner somebody who has a phone to give you, a mobile phone. It started under the Obama administration, so they're called Obama phones. And it gives you free service. You have access to the internet, etc. And there are more and more community centers that have opened their doors, who are providing free internet service, free training, teaching someone how to use the internet, how to secure information. And each day it seems to be progressing. But this needs to be nationwide. And we, once again, need to demand of our electeds that we need to get this information to the people who are on the street. There has to be some form of access. Here in New York, they have these outside kiosks where you have free internet, free phone service, and free charging. And so if you don't have a phone and you want to call Gloria in Atlanta, you can just plug in her number and you have access. So we need to go a step further to make sure everybody has it, especially broadband. Broadband really changes things. And I feel it will educate the deniers and educate them and so forth. But it's about the training. It's about ending homelessness, Zella. And we have to get more of our electeds involved in making sure that every person, every citizen has access. And we have enough dollars, there's enough tax money to pay for this. And so we as advocates, activists, need to organize, go look up an organization in your area. If you don't have one, start one. If you hear of a meeting and you're not invited, as Shirley Chisholm said, bring your own chair to the meeting and sit down and be included. Because people don't realize anytime there's a meeting on government property, federal property, they can't disbar you. They may not include you in the meeting, but they can't tell you to leave because it's federal property and you're a federal taxpayer. And as you said, Zella, we have the power. We need to exercise the power. We need to do it collectively. And everybody that's on this call, find a friend or two and have them join the National Income Housing Coalition. That's more power there so that they can acquire more knowledge. And make sure if they're in public housing development, demand the training that is promised to them under the 24 CFR 964. They're entitled to this. Thank you.
And I'll let Lotta go first, and then I'll chime in.
Thanks, Dr. Brown. I would like to say I live in a rural area. And when I was homeless in the rural area, there's no regular shelters in Hunterdon County. They only had churches who would take in 1 or 2 families. So if you did not have 1 or 2 parents and children, you could stay outside. And even during Superstorm Sandy, when there was no power in our special needs complex for 12.5 days, they did nothing for the people with disabilities. The shelter was not accessible to people who used wheelchairs. So I could bring my own chair, but I couldn't get in. I couldn't be allowed to stay there. And I think some of these inequities have to be addressed not only in the standard housing programs, but in the emergency housing programs, in FEMA. FEMA shouldn't be giving money to the counties or the towns who are not also looking at how are they going to help the elderly and the disabled in an emergency. To have the state of New Jersey tell all of us after Superstorm Sandy, shelter in place when you got no power, it's snowing, there's no heat, there's no water, was ludicrously inadequate. So also in the rural areas, you don't have easy kiosks or places to put them. So maybe instead you could put them in churches, in libraries, in hotels, in other gathering places so they can be accessed. And one of the big things, I'm a member of the National Federation of the Blind, and they have sued the federal government, like Social Security, because people who have low vision or are blind go into the Social Security Administration and they can't use the little kiosk that's there because they can't read it. And there's nothing there. Sometimes there's not even a person there except the guard. So you can't access the things that are supposed to be accessed so that you can get the help from the people inside. So they're working on trying to make sure in every way that all the people can find access to these types of really key necessary services that Mrs. Brown talked about.
So
Yes. I'm sorry. I'll be brief. When we talked about accessing those who are unsheltered or who may be unstably housed. Here in Atlanta, one of our partners, the Beloved Community Development Corporation, talks about bando culture. So in other words, abandoned houses are really not abandoned. They just don't have the lights and the water and utilities and those types of things, but people are actually taking shelter there. So one of our partners, they actually have a day shelter where they allow people to come in and charge those government phones or those iPads, and they have computers set up where they can do that. Now that's fine in Atlanta. This great job. We need more government and philanthropic funding to support those initiatives. But also what we did as a part of our 3B Liberation Tour was to physically go out into the communities. So we partnered with the Fort Valley State University on HBCU and several other partners, including Fresh Communities and Georgia Act. And we went in those various communities that doesn't have that rural broadband, and where people who are in those communities, rural communities, can actually get on the bus and access computers, do trainings, look up things if they need to charge their phones. All of that was available. We sat outside of public housing units. We sat outside in grocery store parking lots, anywhere where we could get to the people. So we didn't wait for the people to come to a building. We actually went to the people, and we found that was very, very effective. And we need more funding to continue that, not only for the government, but all these philanthropic foundations who was all about George Floyd and Black equity and empowerment and all that stuff. You know, that's fallen off now. So we need to pick that up so that people can get that information that may not be able to readily access it in the traditional means.
And we need to rattle that cage.
So one of our participants really truly challenged with a question, and so this is going to bring it up in the rear. What national action are we going to take? We've addressed and spoken about our experiences. Many of us have the shared liked experiences, many of which have gone on for decades. What national action are we going to do?
I would say the Tenant Bill of Rights is, I think, is very extremely important. And that is something that Georgia is looking at. We're looking at on the state level as well as on a local level. But to have that Tenant Bill of Rights, because we have to do something to equalize the inequities between renters and landlords. Because again, there's so much discrimination that's going on. And we have to have that enforcement. We have to have those laws that would benefit tenants. And if you would, we look at, if I had to just name one, I could name several, but we don't have that amount of time. I would definitely say the Tenants Bill of Rights is something that we could do, in which we've already been working on that immediately. So that's what I would say.
Mrs. Brown, you want to chime in?
Oh, Louder had her hand up first, so I'll chime in after her.
Lara?
I would like to say that one of the things we don't have to wait for Congress to do something is that we should demand across the board compliance reviews, particularly around racial and disability systemic inequities. Because one of the things I've been trying to get data on for a really long time is you can get data on overall disabilities. You can get some information across races, but you can't get, of the, say, the fair housing complaints that come in, you had 62% are people with disabilities, and then the other big category is like 27% are racial complaints. How many of those people are people of color with disabilities, or people of color who are elderly and or have disabilities? To really know how we're being affected, we got to be counted in all the ways that we're being affected. And that's not being done. And these compliance reviews need to make sure that if the housing authorities or the states or the other people who are getting all these federal funds, the developers, if they are not actually documenting what kind of housing units people are living in using their vouchers or their other subsidies, then they have to make them do it. They have to get the data for race and disability and accessibility features in the housing units, because they're supposed to be providing that anyway, but nobody's making them do it, at least not here in New Jersey.
And once again, enforcement, data, enforcement. We need a database. Everybody needs to be transparent. The only way we're going to do it is by having the data at our fingertips. And then they can enforce. And if they don't enforce, we want to know why not. And we go to our electeds. And if you want to be reelected, you make sure that these agencies comply. And that's all I can say. It's my mantra is monitoring, oversight, and enforcement. Monitoring, oversight, and enforcement. These developers, they want the high dollars. The LIHC developers, they get their money up front. So they want to do business, then they have to comply. And if they don't comply, there has to be stiff penalties where they're barred from developing more LIHC properties or any federally backed mortgages. The government needs to say, this is the way it's going to be. And we need to make the government say that, because we're voting for the government. The government works for us. As you say, Zella, we already have the power. We need to exercise it. Thank you. There's
one other point about enforcement that I would like to see made.
Well,
The Fair Housing Act has a criminal statute. All of these landlords that are blatantly violating the habitability codes and the harassment codes and the discrimination codes, they should not just be treated to a little conciliation, they should be sent to jail.
That's right.
Jail, they would absolutely hesitate to do some of these things.
Agree.
Thank you, Laura.
And
Com-
then
Thank you. Go ahead, Sid.
I did also want to mention the Tenant Empowerment Act that a few people in the chat have mentioned. And I know we're running short on time, so I think Jerry's in the waiting room, and I'll invite Miss Jerry, who is also part of our tenant cohort, to speak really quickly about that bill, because she also got to speak about it during the White House. And hi, Miss Jerry.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sid. Thank you, Ms. Brown and Dr. Bambi and Professor Zella and Laura. Thank you so much. Very information you gave us this evening. And I just wanted to piggyback on some things that Ms. Brown had said earlier about, the type of tools we have here in New York as far as helping the people that's homeless, living in shelters, as far as devices that they could utilize. And it's all over the streets. And I think every state should adopt that as far as those Obama phones, because it's very easy for them to do. And secondly, I put in the chat WhatsApp. If everyone is familiar with that, WhatsApp is a great tool for families that have people living out of the country that want to get in touch with their families. So that's a great way too. If they had an Obama phone, they could put that WhatsApp on there and they could speak to anyone in the world. So thirdly, I like to speak about the Tenant Empowerment Bill, which is a lot of the things that we have been talking about this evening, tenant protections and how best we can go forward with tenant protection. That is all in 4237. All of this is in that bill. And what we plan to do in that bill when we brought this bill to Representative Waters, she pushed us to file this bill. And this bill is saying, hit the landlords in the pocket where it hurts. And the way we hit the landlords in the pockets where it hurts is we allow the tenants to withhold their subsidies and put it in escrow, and for her to do the same, withhold their portion of the money that they give these owners. And that's where we're going to hit them in the pockets. We don't want to penalize every owner, but these owners, these slumlords that's out here, I mean, they're doing vicious things to tenants. And why should tenants have to suffer? We are the eyes and the ears of all of these buildings, and we know what's going on in these buildings. HUD doesn't have to tell us. So bring the tenants to the table and let the tenants tell you what we need and how we can best give you suggestions on how policies should be done. Change the old ones, start new ones. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miss Jerry. I feel like that
I know
was a
it's a
really
lot.
an excellent way to finish off the webinar. And I know we're a little bit short on time. I don't know, Zell, if you had any closing comments as well that you wanted to share before thanking everyone, and I can give some remarks too.
Power. We all have it. Our experience defines that. Our expertise aligns that. We can make affordable housing a human right for everybody.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Zella, Mrs. B, Dr. Bambi, and Laura for joining us today. This was a really, really good Tenant Talk Live, and I feel like there was a lot of good conversation happening in the chat, and we will follow up with all of the information that was shared today, folks, so please don't feel like you have to write everything down during these calls, because I promise you'll get it afterwards. But if you want to provide any feedback or just give me any ideas for future topics, I did take some of the feedback from the survey that I did a while back, so we'll be incorporating that into the new year. But always feel free to email me if you have any ideas. One thing that we did notice really quickly just before I hop off, and I'll go over just a few minutes for those folks that want to hear these updates, but I'm really excited to just see like the excitement around folks. around our tenant leader cohort. And I know a lot of you have heard about it and are probably like, what is this? It's definitely something very new for NLIHC, and we're working with our resident caucus and a longtime advocates within our network. But we will continue to have more opportunities like tonight to connect with the tenant cohort and hear what they're working on and offer feedback on the stuff that we're working on. And then we'll also let you all know when we can finally open up that group to folks who are outside of that cohort, because we're hoping that this will be like an ongoing thing with more folks to get involved in the future. So please don't let that discourage you. Like, we want this to be a very inclusive thing, but right now it's just the folks that we have now. But in the meantime, we hope that you'll take advantage of the other opportunities that we have to participate in our like tenant-based work. So we have this webinar, Tenant Talk Live, but we're also reviving our policy advocacy. I can't talk. Policy advisory committee. Sorry, my accent definitely did not let me say that word for a second, but just know that it's a really good space for you all to provide feedback on NLIHC's policy priorities, and we'll have our first one tomorrow, December 6th, I believe. I can't remember the time, but we'll definitely share that with you all, and we'll have more in the future as well. And yeah, I'm just really excited to continue growing this strong community with you all and with the folks on this call and across the country. But again, feel free to reach out if you have any ideas, if you want to be featured on a blog, or if you want to join our Facebook group. And that is all I have for today. But thank you, everybody, and hope you have a really good night.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everybody. For
See you
listening.
next year.
Thank you.
Just remember, you have the power.
Power,
Tell them what
Yes.
you want.
yours.
Reparations now.
Yes. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good
Thank you.
Right.